这个是比较特别的东西因为是穆斯林的女生，她们会穿衣服，就是不会让别人看到她们的腿，然后她们的头发那些的。有一些比较严重，她们就是什么都没办法看，就剩下她们的眼睛而已。对，因为这是比较特别的，而且不管是还有就夏天，就是天气很热，他们还是要穿那样的，我觉得比较特别的。
我知道，因为常常看到嘛，从小到大都看到。那其实我觉得一开始会觉得他们，到现在还是会觉得他们很热。然后因为马来西亚天气很就是没有四季嘛，所以一直都是夏天这样子的季节。那其实我会觉得他们好热，但是他们还是非常的好像习惯了，还是很坚持，就是会穿这样子。所以其实我觉得他们很不容易啦，就是有时候会觉得他们真的是因为这个教义他们太虔诚，非常的虔诚，就是很遵从这个生活上面的东西，所以我觉得他们很棒这样子。
In my personal perspective, if I am being asked about women who do not cover their hair or do not wear any hijab, I think it's because it is a religion matter, and then religion is a personal matter, and then the people who confronted women who wear no hijabs or who undress properly according to Islamic perspective, I think they cannot judge this kind of women because this is not their place. The people who belong, the people who have the right to say so about Islamic perspective, to teach them about how to wear or how to dress properly according to Islamic law are the preachers or the grandmaster of Muslim itself. So if you say something or if you confront a woman who wear no hijab, this is not your place, and then this is a religious matter. Because this is a religious matter, this is their personal choice of how they want to behave or how they want to dress themselves. So I think yeah, that's all.
Okay, actually Islam has rules to us as a woman to cover our hair with hijab or use the long and big clothes. Why Islam has rules? It has that rules because Islam want to protect us from any harm that might happen to us, like the catcalling and the sexual harassment. Because in the real life, when someone see our hair or our physical, maybe they have desire because they see our physical. But in the faith, not all the Muslim women do or did that rules, like not wearing the hijab or not wearing the big clothes. Maybe it depends on their choice. But for me it is a good thing, and it is must to do and the right rules to follow.
Okay, in my personal point of view, I think because I was born in Indonesian culture and it is one of Asian culture, some family they mistreated their children according to their gender. Some family they allow their son to have a high education, to pursue education outside of the border or in another city. but again they limit their daughter to do so. Sometimes they only can they do not allow them to pursue higher education, or even if they allow it, they would only do it in the same city as the parents who are living there, so they can control them. So this is kind of like mistreated among parents to their children according to their gender. And then this happens a lot because I know some of the phenomenon. For me, basically, we cannot treat them differently because everyone has equal rights, equal human rights. Men, either they're men or they are women. So that's all.
我觉得新闻上面会，然后大家会讨论，比如说杀女，然后还有荣誉自杀，honor suicide， 这些内容，然后不见得是我想不见得是完全跟宗教伊斯兰宗教教义有关，只是在这个社群里面发生，然后我觉得可能我会关注的是世俗的女性主义者怎么去理解在伊斯兰国家或伊斯兰社群里面的女性运动者他们的运作方式，就不见得这两者的观念是完全相牵在一起，或者是说不同伊斯兰社群里面的女性运动者他们的运动方式。可能我自己认为他们有时候被世俗的女性主义者是不理解的，或者是世俗国家可能会有一种要救伊斯兰穆斯林的女性于水深火热之中这种观念，但是对我来说，我觉得这可能就是会是一种很自大的想法，所以这可能是我目前对伊斯兰内部的女性的权利，以及在争取女性运动的人的想法，尤其是我看到有些女性运动者，他们可能在重新尝试诠释《可兰经》，然后用一个可能过去可能话语权比较是在男性身上的解释方式之外的诠释角度，然后这个诠释的方式以及这个操作手法又如何可能比如说被运用到土耳其他们世俗的政党跟宗教的政党上，那宗教的政党如何去利用这件事情来合理化或者是说增值自己的党派的利益，所以我觉得这好像就是女性权益好像在伊斯兰社群里面现在也就是有很多涟漪，然后这个涟漪不只是在争取女性权益上，包括还有牵扯到一些党派之间的冲突，我是这样理解。
Well, I know some people have stereotyped that women should stay at home, or for example in the married life as a wife we only can taking care of our children, we decide to not work outside. But for me as a Islam woman, we have our right choice. In my real life, I have my own right choice to pursue my dream as far as I want, because for me Islam has flexible rules, that Islam is not limiting our boundaries. We can just adjust it, depends on our situation.
Welcome back. Today we'll be discussing women's issues, women's contestation in Muslim societies. I'm very happy and honored to introduce to you today's keynote speaker, Professor Rifat Hassan. She will be presenting her talk on understanding honor crimes in Muslim societies, case study of Palestinian women. Let me say a few words about Professor Rifat Hassan. She is born in Pakistan, but she has lived in Louisville, Kentucky, United States for more than 30 years. She is now a professor emerita at the University of Louisville. Her doctoral dissertation worked on the philosophy of the understanding of Muslim poet, philosopher Muhammad Iqbal, and she has been considered a pioneer of feminist theology in the context of Islamic tradition. And her works have influenced Muslim women across the world. In 1999, she founded the International Network for the Right of female victims of violence in Pakistan. It is a nonprofit organization which played a major role in having honor crime outlawed in Pakistan. She is also an activist and had been invited to give talks at conferences such as the right of Muslim women at the International Conference on Population and Development in Cairo, 1994, and also in the same year at the 4th UN Conference on Women at Beijing. She has received numerous honors and awards for her work on Islamic feminist theologies, and including the International Action Network for Gender Equality and Law. Dr. Hassan, she also is a pioneer of interreligious dialogue among Jews, Christians, and Muslims. She has founded the Salam Network. This is an interfaith organization of educators to build bridges of understanding and harmony on a knowledge-based foundation among Louisville's diverse groups. So we also noticed from that she actually also developed her local activist organizations. We can give the floor to Professor Hassan.
Thank you very much for your very kind introduction. The topic, as you have been told, of my presentation today is Understanding Honor Crimes in Muslim Societies, case study of Palestinian women. The case study of Palestinian women is the content of the film Women of Freedom, which I believe you have seen. And I shall make some comments about this film later on. But my first concern is to provide you with the theological and the historic context of what are generally today known as honor crimes. I will begin with the theological background. Islam, like the other religions of the major religions of the world, has many sources. The highest authority in Islam is attributed to the Quran, which is a religious text that Muslims believe was revealed by God through the agency of Archangel Gabriel to Prophet Muhammad, who lived in Arabia. He lived in the city called Mecca, was born in 570 of the Christian era. And this text was revealed over a period of about 22 years and was collected together and constitutes what is called the Quran. Islam is a fully historical religion. It's the youngest of the world's major religions, and there is plenty of historical documentation about the sources of Islam, including the Quran. since Muslims believe that the Quran is the word of God, it obviously carries a lot of weight, a lot of authority for them. And so we begin with some Quranic verses, two texts in particular, which are relevant in understanding the killing of female girls. Female infanticide was a practice that was common in pre-Islamic Arabia. That meant that when a female child was born, quite often the parents or the father would decide to kill the child, and the child was killed by being buried alive. That was the common way of killing girls. So what does the Quran have to say about all of that? I'll begin with that, and then I will take you back into history and see how theology and history intersects. There are two Quranic texts that are relevant in understanding the killing of female children, called female infanticide. The first verse is in chapter 81, At-Takwir, verses 8 and 9. And what it says is that on the day of judgment, the day of accountability, when everybody has to give accounts for what they have done in the world, on that day, the girl child that is buried alive is made to ask for what crime she had been slain. Now, obviously, the girl child who has been killed was not responsible for her own killing. So this question is addressed to those who killed her, which means that those who are doing these things will be asked to account for their sinfulness on the day of judgment. The second reference is a longer reference. I'll read it to you and then I will explain it to you. It's Surah 16, chapter 16, An-Nahl, verses 57 to 59. And in this text, it says, "They ascribe daughters unto God, who is limitless in his glory, whereas for themselves they would choose, if they could, only what they desire. For whenever any of them is given the glad tidings of the birth of a girl, his face darkens, and he is filled with suppressed anger, avoiding all people because of the alleged evil of the glad tidings he has received, and debating within himself, shall he keep this child despite the contempt which he feels for it, or shall he bury it in the dust? Evil indeed is whatever they decide." This is a rather complex text, so I will try to clarify what it's saying. The reference is to pre-Islamic Meccans who had several hundred gods. It was a society and they had many gods. And the chief gods, the most important gods that they had, were female gods. So it starts by saying that this is very strange, that they want females as their divinities, as their highest divinities, but they do not want to have girls. And when an Arab heard the tidings, it was told to him that he had a daughter, his wife had given birth to a daughter. His reaction is that his face darkens and he is filled with suppressed anger, avoiding all people because of the alleged evil news that he has received. Why is that? Why is this man, when he hears that he has a daughter, why does he feel so angry and he feels embarrassed and ashamed? Why? I'll get you the answer to that question. The Quran is just asking this question here. And then this man thinks to himself, shall I let this girl live regardless of what dangers she poses to me and my family, or shall I kill it? So either of these two choices, to let the girl live in very difficult, oppressive circumstances, or to kill it, are evil choices according to the Quran. Now, let me tell you a little bit about this society in which this happened, in which the Quran was revealed. It was a majority of the people in Arabia lived in nomadic tribes. They lived in the desert, and there was great scarcity of food and water in the desert. Living was very, very difficult. And these nomadic tribes were on the move all the time, moving from place to place in search of food and water. In difficult circumstances like this, it was obviously not easy for them to raise a large family, to have many children. So they preferred to have sons whom they regarded as assets and not daughters who were seen as liabilities. So the first reason why Arabs didn't want to have daughters was a socioeconomic reason, because they didn't know how they were going to be able to support them. The Quran responds to this in another verse, in another chapter. It says in chapter 17, Al-Isra, verse 31, it says, "And do not kill your children for fear of poverty. It is we who shall provide sustenance for them as well as for you. Verily, killing them is a great sin." So here, the text, Quranic text, is saying that God says, "Do not kill your children. I shall provide for them." So it's responding to the socio-cultural concern. The other reason, and this reason is really very, very important, is that in the mind of the Arab, the birth of a girl child posed a potential threat or danger to what he understood as his honor. Now, in Arabic, you have two distinct words for honor. One is called sharf, which is honor in general. You know, when you say somebody is a noble person or a good person, and you use the word, this is used in that context. But there is another word, which is called ird, and this has a very different meaning. There's an author who has written much about this, and in one of his essays called Honor and Shame Among the Bedouins of Egypt, he says, of all the value concepts employed by the Bedouins of the western desert of Egypt, those of honor and shame are the most vague, most complicated, and most difficult to grasp and to analyze. This author goes on to note that these Bedouins have a separate word, which is this exclusive word called ird. It is used only in connection with female chastity, prudence, and continence. In another comprehensive study on this subject conducted by an author by the name of Faris, he says, ird from its etymology seems to be a partition which separates its possessor from the rest of mankind. This partition is certainly fragile because it is so easily destroyed. In the Jahiliyyah period, this is before Islam, ird was intense and of momentous importance, because besides it was the guiding motive in the acts and deeds of all the Arabs, except those of the Yemen. On account of its sacred nature, it was entitled to take the place of religion. The Arabs put it in the highest place and defended it arms in hand. He goes on to point out that even amongst modern Bedouins, this concept of ird is still in force. The use of this word, though less rich in meaning than it was in traditional times, still keeps its sacred character and its relation with insult. At the present day, the meaning of the word ird has become restricted. In Transjordania, it is associated with the virtue or even the beauty of a woman. In Egypt, the ird of a man depends on his wife's reputation and that of all his female relatives. So the great fear of the Arab who heard that he had just been granted a daughter was that this daughter it was a possibility that this daughter would bring upon him the opposite of honor, which is shame. As I explained before, these Arabs are nomadic Arabs. They were living in the desert, fighting the very harsh environment, also fighting with each other, tremendous amount of infighting amongst the various tribes. Life was very risky. And so they did not know how they were going to defend their daughters. Now, quoting the earlier author again, A.M. Zayed, he says, in a paternalistic society like the Bedouins, where the male occupies a dominant social position in all aspects and activities of life, it is only natural that the honor of the group is determined primarily by the behavior and achievements of the men rather than the women. Nevertheless, the woman can and indeed does play a conspicuous part in determining the honor of her family and lineage in a unique and decisive way that cannot be ignored or minimized. Apart from the important concept of the haram, which is conceptually linked with the woman, this word means sacred. It also means that which is forbidden. The woman's own conduct in daily life bears heavily on the honor of her people. This is clearest with regard to her sexual activities and especially her chastity. The Bedouins do not impose sexual segregation, but they have severe rules for the behavior of one sex toward the other. Deviation from these rules results in the murder of the offender. Everyone guesses what happened to the female, to the woman, but no one speaks about it, let alone approach the authorities. Rape, on the other hand, is usually killed in retaliation, but retribution is not exacted from any of his kinsmen when he escapes beyond reach. Yet this is not regarded as sufficient to wipe out the shame. The girl herself is therefore killed, especially if it is thought that intercourse took place with her consent, and her disgraced kinsmen usually desert traditional homeland and migrate in a voluntary exile in a region where nobody knows about this loss of their honor. Sexual offenses, however slight they may be, are offenses against that particular and more specific kind of honor, which is called earth. Okay, let me clarify this briefly. So the Arabs living in the desert were very fearful that if the females of the tribe, girls or women, were taken prisoner, kidnapped, and sexually molested, this would be a great threat to their honor, and their honor would be ruined. Now, if a rape happened, if a woman was raped, and it came to be known that she had been raped and who the offender was, then it became mandatory upon her relatives, her father or brother or cousin or uncle, to go and avenge the deed, to kill the person who did it. But sometimes that was not enough. So they would go and kill the person who did it and then come back and kill the girl, because it was that as long as the girl was alive, she was a reminder that their honor had been sullied, had been destroyed. So what the Quran is saying to them is that this is totally the wrong attitude. It's also interesting to note that honor in that society belonged only to men, not to women. Women themselves had no honor, but their actions, particularly if they were seen to be in a sexual context, would bring dishonor to their men. So these are the Quranic texts that are relevant in understanding what we are going to be talking about during the rest of this time. The Quran itself is very protective towards women. I will be talking to you after some time about my own work since 1974, when I started working on developing a feminist theology of women. And I will talk to you about the problems I encountered and what was the outcome of my research over 4 decades. Those of you who have seen this film, Women of Freedom, and maybe are also familiar with some other such stories, might think that the reason for the killing of or some kind of brutality being inflicted upon women is because Islam says so. And what I am saying to you is that Islam does not say so at all. Absolutely not. Rather, the opposite. There are verses in the Quran, like Surah 24, An-Nur, verse 5. And let me read that to you. And as for those who accuse chaste women of adultery, and then are made to produce 4 witnesses in support of their accusation, flog them with 80 stripes, and ever after refuse to accept them from giving any testimony, since it is they who are truly depraved. In order to indict or build a case for adultery or for fornication against a girl or a woman, according to the Quran, you have to produce 4 eyewitnesses who have seen actually the deed being done, which is virtually impossible. And so the Quran says that if somebody makes an allegation of this kind of thing happening to a female and cannot produce witnesses, then they should be punished and their witness forever excluded from acceptance. And then there's another situation that it talks about. And for those who accuse their own wives of adultery, but have no witnesses except themselves, let each of those accusers call God 4 times to witness that he is indeed telling the truth. And the 5th time that God's curse be upon him if he is telling a lie. But as for the wife, all chastisement shall be averted from her by calling God to witness 4 times that the man is indeed telling a lie, and the 5th time that God's curse be upon her if he's telling the truth. So in these cases where witnesses are required, in the final analysis, if a woman swears by God that she is not guilty, her evidence has to be accepted. This gives you some idea of the attitude of the Quran about toward women in general. And later on, I hope to be able to give you some more examples in a more general context. So what seems to me to be very tragic is that although the Quran outlawed female infanticide, okay, in very categorical terms, outlawed it, that it must not be done. Female infanticide might not be common today in the Muslim world, but female homicide, which is the killing of Muslim women, is probably the most common crime that you will find in Muslim countries. So this is another aspect of it. As you have seen in the film, you hear the stories of these various Arab women, Arab Palestinian women, all of them that are shown in the film, who have been accused of honor crimes in one way or the other. Either that they have had sex outside of marriage or that they have violated some other norms, like breaking off a relationship which the family approved of, or falling in love with somebody else, and so on. So these are, what does all this mean? Again, I have to point out to you the big gap between what is Islam, what is the normative teaching of the Quran, and the words of the Prophet of Islam, and what is culture. You know, all the 5 major religions of the world, Judaism, Christianity, Islam, Hinduism, and Buddhism, they developed in patriarchal cultures. What does that mean? You know, when a religion comes to any group of people, any particular culture, it doesn't, sort of drop from heaven to earth. It is filtered through many layers and levels of cultures and subcultures. So you find that the same religion in different parts of the world may have some very different characteristics. So in case of Islam, you have an Arab Islam, a Pakistani Islam, an Indian Islam, an Egyptian Islam, a Turkish Islam, so many different varieties of Islam. They're not all the same. These cultures, what do I mean by patriarchal culture? Patriarchal culture is a culture that is male-controlled, male-centered, and male-oriented. Okay, and so the males are at the top of the hierarchy, and women are at the bottom. Okay. Now there are other cultures. There are cultures in other places. For example, say in a country like Pakistan or Afghanistan, where in addition to patriarchalism, you also have tribalism. And in Pakistan, you have feudalism. These are all misogynistic ways of life, which are oppressive towards women, which deny the equality of women with men. I want to now tell you a little bit about the work I've done and how it connects with what we've been talking about. In 1974, when I was teaching at Oklahoma State University in the United States, I was asked by the students, Muslim students, to give a talk about the rights and role and position of women in Islam. And I thought that I would do that with reference to what the Quran says about women. So I started reading very intensively the Quranic passages relating to women. And as I read them, I started to feel very angry. And my anger was due to two reasons. One was that I found that what the rights that the Quran gives to women and how Muslim women are actually treated in practice are so different from each other. And the second was that I realized for the first time in my life that a lot of things that had happened to me as a Muslim female had happened because of that, because of this cultural gap between religion, the teachings of religion and practices of Muslims. Okay, so then starting from there, I said, well, I want to read the Quran from a non-patriarchal perspective. As I just said to you, all the major texts, all the major religions have been filtered through patriarchalism, through patriarchal cultures. And what has happened in Islam, as has also happened in the other major religions, is that the texts, the major sources of Islam, as I said, the main source is the Quran, the highest authority is the Quran, followed by the authentic sayings of the Prophet. All these texts are interpreted, have been interpreted through history only by men. So when I started my work in 1974, I had no model in front of me that I could follow and say, now I want to arrive at an interpretation of the Quran, which does not have this patriarchal bias. So, nobody had done it before me. So I had to then come up with my own principles of hermeneutics, means principles of interpretation. And I came up with three. One is that linguistic accuracy. If a word, one should know the Quran is written in Quranic Arabic. What does each word mean? What did it mean at the time that the Quran was revealed? Second is philosophical consistency. If a word in the Quran is used many, many times, you have to look at all the context in order to determine what this word means. And then the third one, which I call the ethical criterion, is the idea of justice. If the Quran is the word of God, as Muslims believe that it is, then it must reflect the qualities of God. And amongst the highest qualities of God, there are two. One is mercy and compassion, and the other one is justice. So the Quran, every Quranic text must reflect the justice of God. And so if there is something that is interpreted in a way that is manifestly unjust, even from a human point of view, that cannot be the correct interpretation. So I started this study in 74, and for 10 years I was doing the study till 1984. And I developed my own understanding. And according to my understanding, there was no bias against women in the Quran. In fact, the Quran was very protective about their rights. I am totally convinced that the source of oppression has nothing to do with the Quran. 1984, I was in Pakistan. I come from Pakistan. I used to visit Pakistan very often, and I spent 2 years in Pakistan at that time. This was soon after the Iranian Revolution of 1979, the Islamic Revolution of Iran. That was the watershed event, an extremely important event in recent modern history. And what happened after the revolution was that other countries began this exercise of what they call Islamization, meaning promulgating laws which were meant to be, I mean, these countries are Muslim to start with, but they wanted to make laws that made it even more Islamic. And if you look at the content of these laws, you find that they are, all of them targeting Muslim women, all of them making women less than fully human. So I was in Pakistan in 1984, and the country was ruled by the military. Through most of its history, Pakistan has been ruled by the military. It was under martial law. No political activity was allowed. A handful of educated Muslim women, but these were mainly Western educated, Westernized secular women, became very upset at these laws, and they started having small things like press conferences and so on, because they couldn't have any political meeting to see what they could do about it. And a group of these people came to me when I was in Lahore in Pakistan in 1984, and they said to me, "You have been studying this subject for 10 years. Can you come up with a theology of liberation for Muslim women based on the Quran? Because we don't know the Quran. And these laws are being promulgated in the name of Islam. We have to fight them in the name of Islam." So that was another turning point in my life. And I had to start now thinking about how to change these attitudes and these beliefs in Muslim society. And so I started on this theological journey, and I was basically looking at two ideas that are very firmly rooted in Muslim minds. One is that God's initial creation, first creation was Adam. Adam was a male person, and woman was created from the rib of Adam. So she is a secondary creation. So she is subordinate and inferior and secondary in creation. The second is that though woman was created second, she's first in guilt because she got Adam thrown out of paradise. I'm sure some of you must know this story called the fall of man. Now, both these stories have nothing to do with Islam. They come out of the Christian tradition. These are Christian beliefs. But because Christianity was the dominant religion of the world, these beliefs impacted both Islam that came after Christianity and Judaism that came before Christianity. So these have become pretty international. And so I have been working on this theology. I wish I had a lot more time. I could tell you more about it. Anyway, so I started this, and then the passion of my life as I was doing this work, really going all the way back to 74, was that this knowledge, this correct understanding of the Quran must be transmitted to Muslim women so that they know what their rights are. And if they know what their rights are, it gives them a tool for fighting for their liberation, for their equality. So I've traveled the world and spoken at so many places to give this message. Okay, now I'm making a shift to this specific incidents of violence against women in Pakistan. In 1999, the BBC in England showed a film, a documentary film. It was called Murder in Parda, means murder in secret, murder, behind a veil. and it was about honor crimes in Pakistan. I'm very sorry to tell you that Pakistan has more honor crimes than all the rest of the world put together. The number is very frightening. So anyhow, this film was shown. It was shown in England, where you have a very, very large percentage of Pakistanis living there. They were very incensed by this film. They said, this is all propaganda, British propaganda. It doesn't happen in Muslim countries and so on. So that was the attitude, very rejecting of this film. In the US, in February, this film was released in London in January of 1999. In February, a month later, Nightline, which is an American program, showed this film, and they had two commentators. And one of the commentators, we were both from Pakistan. I was the other commentator, and the other one was a lawyer. And I was interrogated about this film. Incidentally, I had not seen the film until that time, but I could answer the questions in the sense that, why are these Muslims killing their wives and daughters? What does it, why does the Quran tell them to do these things and so on? And I kept saying, no, this is not Islamic. This is not Quranic. This is Muslim culture. And these people are ignorant about Islam. And if they know something about Islam, they have distorted it. Anyhow, this program was aired very late in the night, about 11 or 12 at night. And soon after that, soon after I appeared in this program, I started to get a lot of emails, either from South Asian students, Muslim students, or from American women. Because this film was so graphic, it showed so many cases of women, young girls being burnt alive, acid thrown in their face, mutilated in all kinds of ways. It's almost unbearable to watch the imagery of this film. So they liked what I had said, because what I had said, this is not Islam, this is Muslim culture, and we need to reform it. We need to come out of it. So they wrote to me and said, can we do something about it? This is awful. And so I started this network. Initially, it was just an internet group, but then it became an organization, which I got registered, and it was called the International Network for the Rights of Female Victims of Violence in Pakistan. And so the first challenge for me was to answer these Pakistani men who said these things don't happen. This is just British propaganda. So what I started to do was I started to document them. And I think in the next 3 or 4 months, I had documented hundreds of cases, and I was documenting them from Pakistani newspapers. They were published. So I collected them and I started putting them on the internet. And in about 6 months' time, we had about 12 or 13,000 members all across the world, as far as Fiji and Australia and so on. People were joining and they wanted to do something about it. So that was very encouraging. And in the year 2000, I had the opportunity to take that film and to talk to President Musharraf, who was then the president of Pakistan. He was also a military general, but he was progressive in some ways in his thoughts. And I put to him this travesty of Islam and justice by the way that people were using the name of Islam to commit such horrible crimes. And it had some impact on him immediately, but then we continued this conversation, and there were other activists joining in. So in April of 2000, they issued a law in Pakistan that honor crimes were against the law of Pakistan, and anybody who committed it would be very severely punished. Also, they established burn centers. In Pakistan, the majority of the women are burnt. They are victims of burning. And so there was some progress over there. So where are we now? One thing that we did that I think that the organization I formed had a part to play in this, there were also other organizations, was that honor crimes became a part of the international human rights agenda. It wasn't there before. Just like before 1994, when we had the conference of on women and development in UN Conference on Development in Cairo. That was the first time that the issue of female genital mutilation came to the fore and became an international human rights issue. So after all the work that was being done, particularly after 1999, and Amnesty International was also doing a lot of work, this became a part of the international human rights agenda. And that has had some manifest impact. For instance, I live in the United States, and I have been a witness to some women who have fled from their countries, some Arab women, some from Pakistan, Turkey, and so on, Egypt, and they have come to this country and they seek asylum on grounds of that they are threatened by honor crimes. And initially, the U.S. didn't recognize it, but then after some time, they have made a law that applies the criteria of domestic violence to people who are applying for asylum. So we have made some progress, but we have a long way to go. When I was looking at the film that Abir Zebak Haddad has made, very fine film, and hearing the stories of these young women who it seemed, were killed on very flimsy grounds. And it shows the story, the voice of this one man, the brother who had killed his wife, and he was very sorry that he had done that. And he said, my sister was an angel. Then there's another brother who's killed his wife, and he's very happy, he's very proud that he did that. And so, if you look at there are hundreds of men in Pakistani jails who are in jail because of these crimes, and they are very proud of it. And this is the next point I want to mention, that these crimes, again, remember the Islamic rules, the Quranic rules, and what cultural practices are. Some years ago, 6 women were buried alive in the province of Baluchistan. It's one of the tribal belts of Pakistan. It came to be known, it was reported in newspapers, and in the parliament, a question was put to the representative, to the member of the parliament who came from that region. And he was asked this question, how did this happen? Why did this happen? 6 women buried alive. And he said, it's a matter of my tradition of honor. You cannot discuss this in the parliament. And that was it. It was not discussed. These cases are not discussed. They're going on all around you. So what's our hope now? As someone I'm an educator by profession, and I have given, most of my life to my effort to bring forth a message of hope and liberation from the Quran, and to share it with as many people as I can. So I think really that, first of all, that Muslim women have to be educated about what their rights are. And then Muslim men have to be educated, because, Muslim women don't live in a world of women only. They're also men, that they have to be educated. It's a very tough challenge, how to educate them. If you look around, you see so many problems going on in the Islamic world. Recently, I have written an article about this issue of Islamic education that is being debated before the Taliban. The Taliban say that they will allow Muslim women to receive Islamic education. Well, what does that mean? And then they have to wear this garb, black garb, shrouding them from head to foot, and then this is the Islamic dress. All of this is incorrect. This is totally incorrect. This whole business of the very first verse of the Quran says that God gave human beings the pen, the book, to write, to read, to think. So the being educated, being rational, being a thinking person is the first message of Islam. It's an extremely rational religion, and it is a very just and compassionate religion. But the way that it has been interpreted, wrongly interpreted, and the way it has affected the people. Now, these young people in this film, Women of Freedom, you know, they're talking about Islam and they know nothing about Islam. But Islam is being misused. So I was happy to see in this film that there is some protest, and, you know, young women protesting, older women protesting, and they are saying that you know, a crime is a crime and it should be regarded as such. Now, you know, there are two kinds of movements that are going on in the Muslim world about this. There are people who are, you might call secular human rights activists, who don't want to talk about religion at all. They want to just talk about human rights laws. And so they are advocating that religion should be left out of this discussion altogether. And then there are people like myself who believe that religion can be a source of tremendous liberation and strength for women if you understand it correctly, and that it's their best bet to move forward. Because if they don't go this way, their life would be very much harder. So this struggle is going on. And I'm very happy about your film festival. I think it's fantastic that what you are doing, and I hope that such efforts are replicated in Muslim countries, because it is very important to realize what's happening, and film is a very powerful, very graphic medium that makes it come alive. You know, people say that these kind of crimes are committed by people who are ignorant, or people who are poor, or people who are not very civilized. And that also is incorrect. The majority of Muslim women in the world, there are approximately 1.8 billion Muslims in the world, so at least half of them are women. And the majority of them live in villages. They are poor and they are illiterate. And the oppression that they suffer cannot be explained in words. It's beyond words. But I'm not talking about them in this story. In 1999, there was this case of a young woman. She was 29 years old. Her name was Samia Server. She had been, her parents were very prominent. Her father was the head of the Chamber of Commerce, and her mother was a doctor, medical doctor. And this young woman had been married at a very young age to her cousin, who was extremely abusive. And she stayed with him for 10 years, and she had 2 children, but he was constantly abusive to her. And he pushed her down the stairs one time, and then her parents took her back, and they said they were not going to send her back because he was abusive. After some time, she wanted to continue her studies. So she joined the study of law. And while she was studying, one of her fellow students, she met, and they fell in love, and she wanted to marry him. She told her parents that, I mean, she had been already divorced for like 2 or 3 years. She asked her parents that she wanted to do that, and they said, she took the opportunity one day and she ran away to a women's shelter, which was run by a group of women lawyers, activist lawyers. And so she went there and she said, I'm not going to go back because, you know, this is, I'm in a very dangerous situation vis-a-vis my parents. So after some time, her parents contacted this organization, and she refused to see her father. And then her mother sent her a message and said, look, I am your mother. I understand how you feel, and I will help you, but I need to see you. So she agreed to see her mother. So this meeting was arranged in the office of this lawyer. This Samia Server was sitting there, and the mother came. She was kind of a fragile person, and there was a man who was helping her to walk. He was sort of assisting her. And so she came into the room, and, you know, point blank range, this man shot Samia Server dead. So the mother brought the assassin to the lawyer's office, and the daughter was killed. And then they ran off. The man who did the shooting was actually killed by one of the guards, but the mother got away. And this case aroused a lot of furor amongst the people, but nobody was punished. Nobody was punished. So, you know, it's not only a crime of the uncivilized, the uneducated people, also of very, very powerful people. And we have to bear that in mind, that, you know, it's cultural differences and economic differences and the political differences all intersect here. Women are at the center of this terrible situation of injustice and oppression and brutality. And I hope that all the activists in the world join in fighting these honor crimes. I'm done now.
Thank you so much. It's so mixed feelings, both encouraging but also depressing to hear you talk. I think I want to encourage our audience to raise your questions, but I will share with you some of my reflection and thoughts. So we are looking at this enormous and also uncomprehensible condition of the immunity of crimes against women in contemporary societies. It is not ancient stories. It's not the tribal or feudal societies, but nowadays still, okay, in our societies, in our, actually during this preparation of the film festival, the students and I watched several films, including there's a river, a girl in the river in Pakistan.
Yeah.
And also other documentaries of the women being burned by the acid, right? And also the face were totally ruined, destroyed. And also the stories of you mentioned that being buried alive or murdered in their neighborhood by their brothers or fathers and so on. It's a long way for us to go. Of course, in Taiwan, people don't feel that deeply, but when we have more and more students around us, I mean, they are from India, Pakistan, Indonesia. Indonesia also, they have this practice, but not in big cities, but in these villages. So we see that there's practices varied from place to place, maybe by the local elders of the religious elite. They will persist and fixate this laws they think are the truth. So I think you showed brilliantly how paradoxical the gap it is from Quran, the text itself, and then the later interpretation, and also the historical trajectories that fixate and make these laws rigid and reinforced by actually human perception, human power structure. I know it is very difficult, but I truly believe your final words are actually, or no, whatever you have been doing for a long time. Education is very, very important. Education for both Muslim men and women, for both Muslim and non-Muslims, because mostly they are also in the intermingled society. For example, Indonesia or Malaysia, okay, they are not a total Islamized country, but the Islam law seems to be taking the primacy position. But then if any society or community has a capacity to voice a different opinion or to educate the entire population, then or through media, through publications, through local activities, even theatrical work, things might change, and also more and more people could engage in the same discussion. This is part of the initial thoughts for our endeavor, but I think that is actually part of the long way to go.
A number of things I said are very discouraging, but there are also some very encouraging things. You know, when I started my theological work in 1974, I was the only person in the world doing that. And now there are hundreds of people.
Yeah.
So, you know, that, and women and men who are doing feminist theology. That's one thing. The other thing is that if you travel through the Muslim world, you will find that there are women's movements in the forefront of all the changes that are happening in society. Even in Saudi Arabia, you know, they have all these little projects, whether they're education or health or economic empowerment or, you know, hundreds of different projects. But women are in the forefront of the social changes that are happening across the Muslim world. And that is also a sign of hope. Because, you know, when women become empowered, you know, in terms of having more education, more possibilities of working, it changes the complexion of society. So a lot of those things are also happening, and we have to take account of them. Yeah.
Yes. Also considering all those women, for example, actually also in Afghanistan, now they are forbidden to get education, but people are educated, they are different. So things might also change. But there is a question from the Q&A section. One question is that, thank you for your amazing sharing. We will love to hear Professor Rifa Hassan to share more about her advocacy work. It will be good reference for those Muslim women on their advocacy work too. Okay, so maybe we should, maybe, I don't know, maybe we can arrange, and other people, every one of you from different country, you could invite her to give talks. She's based in US, but I think she travels around, and also through internet or Zoom, she can be available. It is so important. Yeah. Did you experience any threat in the past?
Well, you know, I was trying to be as careful as I could be because I was giving, you know, my talks all over the place, but I was working mostly with women's groups, and I was working in places that I knew were safe places, like, you know, some colleges or universities, or, you know, so I didn't go to the headquarters of the most conservative religious groups and try to convert them. You know, I tried to stay in safe places, but I did, you know, there was not a physical threat to me, but I have received a lot of very threatening comments about some of my things, you know, they said. And one story I remember is that I was a speaker at the 4th UN conference in China in 1995. And I was talking about, you know, the similar things to what I said today. And I was saying that, you know, the Quran doesn't say that Adam was a male and that woman was created from the rib of the male. This is not a Quranic story. It's a biblical story. The Quran says men and women are equal. They're equal in every way and so on. So I was saying that, you know, I only had like 10 minutes. And at the same time that I was making these comments in China, Islamic organizations, and one in particular in the United States, was simultaneously issuing condemnation of it. And they were saying, today is a terrible day when a Muslim sister stands up and says these things, and, you know, she's misleading the world and so on. So, lots of, I mean, then some, one of my friends saw that, and at the same time that I was speaking, this was being released. So it's not, it's not an easy journey, but I have been fortunate, and I'm still alive. I'm still here. I'm still doing my work.
No, you actually encourages many Muslim women, but also I think you inspire many Muslim men. I hope so, and
Well,
also especially our Muslim men students. They are educated. They should help toward there's a liberation, emancipation based on the true Quran. Farid, Professor Farid, into the panelist session.
Thank you very much, Dr. Rifat, for your presentation and for the frank discussions. So I have, I suppose, two very simple questions. You mentioned just now that you received condemnation from some Muslim organizations. Yeah, and it's very typical. We know these things so well, right? But I've been strong critique of our religious authorities and government in their persecution of local Shiites for many years. And then when you do that, you also get condemned by various groups or individuals, organizations, muftis, that kind of thing.
Yes, sure.
So my question is, in the kind of work that you do and in supporting women's rights from a traditional Muslim perspective, in other words, you're not invoking simply Western liberal ideas, but you are going to the Quran and so on and so forth. What kind of support do you have from the traditional ulama? Are there traditional ulama who, on the basis of their understanding of the sources, the traditional sources, are you able to at least identify some traditional ulama who agree with you and who would support you? Well, the second question is more about what you were saying, Joyce, earlier. What is the situation in terms of men supporting such a cause?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. There are, when you say traditional scholars, I'm not quite sure what you have it, how you define traditional, but like the late Asghar Engineer, Dr. Asghar Engineer from Bombay, very strong feminist scholar, and whom I knew for many, many years. And also, there are others, but I want to tell you a little story about this, which might be of interest to you. Some years ago, I started, I think about 10 or 12 years ago, in addition to all my written work, my research, etc., I started doing training of specific groups of people, because my concern was that the majority of the women who are Muslim women who are in the greatest need, under the greatest threat, are women I cannot access. They live in some village somewhere. They don't come to my classes. They don't come to conferences. I have no way to reach them. So I started training these people who were, like working in social welfare departments, domestic violence departments, and so on, so that they could go actually to the areas where there was need and talk to them. Anyway, some years ago, I think it was in 2009, that a German foundation sponsored a delegation from Afghanistan to come for this training session. And I was given this impression that this is a women's delegation. Now, I had written a book for this purpose. And when the program started, or when it was about to start, I discovered that there were 6 ulama in it, traditional ulama, seemingly, and there were 4 or 5 men in it who were representing these organizations such as UNIFEM and so on, United Nations organizations. And there were just like 4 or 5 women in this group. So I was very dismayed. And I said, this is, I've been misled. And my whole orientation, my whole approach, my book is all about, looking at it from a women's point of view, and here are all these men. Anyhow, at that point, there was nothing I could do. I had to proceed with the program. It was very intensive study for like 3 weeks, morning till night. And so, initially I wanted that these men should be made observers and not really participate in the discussion, but they wouldn't accept that, especially the ulama. They wouldn't. So it happened. It went on, and then after it ended, the final session, and the German organization had also came. They wanted to evaluate it, and they wanted the opinion of these people. And so the head of these ulama was asked, what do you think? And he said his word. He said that we agree with 90% of what Dr. Hassan has said. And there are some things we don't agree with, like, when I say Adam was not a male person, whatever. But they said because the emphasis in her work is so much on social justice, and social justice is such an important part of Quranic teaching and Islam, that we think that, we agree with her. And then they started talking about their own experiences, that we are, fighting in Afghanistan for women's rights, like, mahar at the time of marriage, and other rights, inheritance, and so on. And so I was utterly surprised to see, hear this from these people. And so I think that there are a lot of people who may not be publicly identified as, great scholars, but they are learned people, and they are supportive. And I think if there was some way to find them, it would add to the strength of the movement.
Yeah. I was actually, by traditional scholars, I meant those who were trained in the madrasa system. The late Ashkar Ali Engineer, of course, I knew him. We used to work together on some projects. Very learned and delightful man also. But he's not, I wouldn't say he's traditional in the sense that he doesn't come from that tradition.
Right.
Because it seems to me to have allies among the traditional ulama is very important, because they are the ones who can be the mediation. They can explain to the people that the kind of things you are saying are not Western ideas, but they are ideas rooted in Islamic tradition, in Sunnah and Hadith and Quran and so on. So I think that's the biggest challenge for us, to have such people on our side.
I agree. And, one sign of hope is that in the last 8 or 10 years, I've had several men who have written to me that they are doing research on Islamic feminism, and they want some guidance. So there are more and more men getting into, they're not ulama already, but they are getting into the discipline.
Yeah, right.
And also there are some, I don't know if you're familiar with Dr. Javed Ahmed Ghamdi, who was actually in Malaysia for a long time. He had to leave Pakistan because they were threatening to kill him.
Yes.
He's a person I know very well. I have a very good relationship with him. And, I think that, our views may not be 100% the same, but I think that the impulse beneath them is for women to go forward, for women to be liberated, for women to take their place in the world. Although we don't come from the same place, but we are moving toward a society of liberated women, and I think it's recognized that unless you educate your women, unless that happens, you cannot have an enlightened society. It is absolutely not possible.
Of course, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, one student from the floor also said this. Okay, let me see. Thanks for sharing your advocacy when you also refer to the Quran and the contextual story when its verses were revealed. I also feel sad when there are many phenomena that harm women because of the incomplete interpretation of Quran verses. They also cut certain verses and lead to oppression of women. Sometimes I also wonder first, why incidents that oppresses women, violence, murder occur in Arab countries where Arab countries themselves have a strong history of spreading Islam. As you said, they do it in the name of Islam. but in fact, they don't really understand Islam itself. Why does such a thing happen from time to time? Second, why has the interpretation of the Quran been dominated by men? Why are not many women actively involved in the translation of the Quran? Actually, I also share the same wonder, because I heard that, for example, in Malaysian society tradition in the past, in history, there were a Muslim leader who led the team, the army, and so on. Another question. Okay. All right. Yeah, I think that's fine. In recent years, the Islamic feminism is on the way, but the idea in Indonesia, for example, is still more challenged by conservative ideas as the rise of understanding such as Wahhabism and Salafism. Yeah, how to compete with this narrative, especially since progressive ideas such as like this are often labeled secular or liberal by conservatives. Yeah, would you care to address both questions?
Yeah, you know, there are these various movements that are going on in the Islamic world, and then what she's talking about is the Salafi movement or Wahhabism, which is generally, you know, taken back to the Saudis for their support because they have propagated or advocated or supported a particular way of looking at Islam in many places. And they established these Islamic universities. One was established in Pakistan and one was established in Kuala Lumpur. And the third one was originally established in Uganda, and I don't think it ever took off. But that's very strong influence. And there are other movements also. There's the Sufi movements. You know, Sufi largest agents of the spread of Islam in the world. One was traders and the other one were the Sufis. And they have a very different understanding of Islam. So there are other alternatives, but you know, what's happening again, and I see this in your choice of films and your programs, the intersection of social change and culture and politics, and all of these things coming together, you know, that I personally believe that the religion of the majority of Muslims, folk religion of the people, is very heavily influenced by the Sufis. You know, we have these shrines all over the Islamic world and very different kind of interpretation, very liberal, you know, because they're very God-centered. They're not into, you know, the policing the state and, you know, into this hierarchy of power. But, you know, these kind of people are not given any support in sometimes by the government. Very recently now in Afghanistan, you know, I know, for instance, one scholar, he's a leader of a Sufi order, and he was a poet, and he had written a book about 6 months ago that was very popular, but he was on the top of the hit list of the Taliban, and somehow miraculously he managed to escape. But he has a very big following in Afghanistan. And, you know, Afghanistan is the country from which Rumi came. And, you know, the Western world is crazy about Rumi. They don't know he came from Afghanistan. So, you know, there are these other ways of thinking. But unfortunately, and I think, therefore, a dialogue such as the one that you are promoting, bringing people face to face, is critically important, because at least we hear about these things, you know, that there are these women's organizations and Sufis and other liberal scholars, you know, who are making a big difference. And they don't have to be in the majority, you know, the people who made changes in the world, who've transformed the world, who have changed the world. So, yes, you know, I think a lot of good things are going on.
Yeah, a lot of new thoughts will also occur, even within these few hours, 2 hours with you.
You know, during the lifetime of the Prophet had, you know, amongst one of his most popular sayings is, learn half of the faith from me and the other half from Aisha, who was his young wife, who was a great scholar. And at the time of the Prophet, he encouraged women to come forward to be scholars. And in the next century, you know, it was a century of mystics. And the most outstanding Sufi mystic was Rabia of Basri. She is probably the most famous Muslim Sufi. And so, you know, there were women who were there. But as time has gone on and as there have been all these changes, you know, the first 300 years of Islam, it was growing. It was a revolutionary religion, was, you know, making a lot of changes. And then the conservative wave started, you know, when Islam was attacked by the Mongols in Asia and Europe. And so the thing turned, but there were women and there have been women. And again, like a lot of things that we don't know about, their works are not propagated, but they have been there. I will tell you something interesting. You know, I have been teaching Islam for 33 years in the university, and I've had a lot of Arab students in my classes, you know, mainly from the rich countries, you know, Saudi Arabia and Kuwait and so on. And in a course I teach on Islam, reading the Quran is mandatory. They have to read it. And you would be surprised to know that the Arabs get far worse scores than the Americans. The Americans do better than them. So, you know, what does that tell you? It's just the fact that you're an Arab doesn't mean that you understand the Quran. Just like if you know English, it doesn't mean that you understand Shakespeare's English. It's a particular kind. It's classical Quranic Arabic, and they just think that because they were born Muslim, they know what's in it, but they don't. They really don't.
Right. Okay, thank you so much. I truly think their audience today, they will start to read more the text, and also maybe some of the female scholars in the past, Sufism and other texts, and they will in the future be the educator for their society, their community, to both Muslim and non-Muslim society. So that is our hope.
My request is that please give my email contact to whoever wants to write to me.
Okay.
I would be happy to respond. So.
Thanks a lot. I think both men and women, either students or scholars. We also have scholars in Taiwan or elsewhere who participated in this event. So I do want these ideas can be fully circulated. Thanks a lot, Rifa.